All right, let's talk prolapse, but we're going to talk prolapse symptoms versus you just see it. And what does that even mean? So symptoms meaning the typical heaviness, pressure, feels like a tampon kind of floating around in there, or feels like a tampon's going to fall out, versus you look and you see something in the opening or in the detritus. So two different scenarios. And I want to preface this by saying there's no right answer. If you look down there and it bothers you, if you feel the sensation and it bothers you, that is enough reason to go get it checked out because it bothers you. It affects quality of life. I think the next piece, Abby, don't eat trash. The next piece is to decide whether whether it matters or not. So once you get it checked out and you're like, all right, this bothers me, I want to look at it, I want to go see a physio, I want to see what's going on with it. I think then it's a little bit harder because if you have prolapse but no symptoms, then there's really not a lot of things to try this and see how it goes, because we're not necessarily looking to change the location. And this is where I may have patients track. And I'm very selective about who I have tracked, because if it's somebody that's super freaked out by it, looking more is not going to make it better. That might actually bring on symptoms. But if it's, just out of curiosity as opposed to freak out judgment, we may notice, okay, is the position different morning versus afternoon versus activity? If we can gather that information in a non-judgmental, non-scary way, again, the organ's supposed to move, but are there certain situations or certain things that you're doing that make it pretty significant? So, for example, I would expect a prolapse to be positioned a little bit differently late in the afternoon after being up working and taking care of kids versus first thing in the morning if you've been asleep all night. I would expect that, but if it's like protruding out of the body and it wasn't first thing in the morning, then we might have a conversation about, what are you doing? What are your pressure management strategies? It would be very similar to if you had symptoms. Is it worth considering a pessary when it's at its worst? Is it bad enough that you're setting yourself up for further issues? Come on, Abs. But if you have symptoms, then I think it's a lot easier to navigate, especially symptoms that change and fluctuate. If they're constant all the time, it's a little trickier because we don't know what makes it better, what makes it worse. Sorry, we have flyovers sometimes here. I live near Arlington National Cemetery, so when they have funerals, we get all sorts of different kinds of airplanes, helicopters, you name it. So if you have symptoms, I think then it's a lot easier to say, okay, well, what makes it better? What makes it worse? What can we play with? How you lift, how you move, how you manage your time vertically. So there's different ways to navigate it, but it really does start with, sorry, my dog's literally trying to eat trash. It starts with, does it matter to you? Because if it doesn't, then that's a whole nother animal. And I guess the concern is too, is there ever any situation with a prolapse where you might not get symptoms, or it's there, but it could be medically really bad for you, like an obstruction or things like that? Typically not. I've seen women with, really severe grade 4 rectocele, for example, and just stuffed it right back in, no big deal. It kind of bothered her that she had to keep stuffing things back in, but it was no big deal. Eventually went on to have surgery, did great. She obviously did some splinting and some manual pressure to make sure that she could fully have a bowel movement, but she was able to navigate it and it was fine. So, but I'm getting this question more and more, and I think it's because more people are hearing about prolapse. I still have some that are completely, they feel like they've been completely thrown off guard and unprepared, but I think more and more people are hearing about it and noticing it and like, okay, now what do I do with it? And some are symptomatic and some aren't. So DM me your questions about prolapse, whether you have symptoms or not. Happy to help you navigate. I think the more that we can have these conversations, the more we're going to start to figure out patterns and again, be able to follow people more long-term that are getting this addressed conservatively as opposed to hopping right into surgery, or even if they do have surgery, what the outcomes are later on. So let me know. Love to hear your questions.